Did you follow any of this, Ricardo? Like what was happening over here?
No, the Boris Johnson, no. What offense?
So he broke his own lockdown laws.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So he was fined by the police, who didn't bother to investigate the really serious likely breaches. But he is officially a criminal.
He had more parties in Downing Street than any other location in the whole of the UK.
Oh, yeah.
He's such a twat.
During the lockdown.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I read about it, yes. I don't know, but Boris Johnson is not that bad if you compare with Bolsonaro and Trump. Come on, Trump, he tried a coup d'etat in America. It's a very high bar. So,
but I think Johnson would have tried it if he could get away with it, but it's difficult getting people down to the city to protest.
Welcome everybody back to another Sunday Roast. We are with a plethora of excellent guests. Plethora the right word? We've got a lot of excellent guests. Could you please introduce yourself to everyone, and then Max, and then Phil?
Hi, my name is Ricardo Hammoud. I'm an economics professor, financial consultant, and friend of Alex.
Max?
Hi everyone, my name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel. I talk about British politics and in particular Brexit.
And Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil, former science and maths teacher, but now shouts at the internet discussing mostly British politics on my YouTube channel, A Different Bias.
And I'm Political X, also known as Alex. I run my own political YouTube channel, and I'm a historian.
The environment policies here are a disaster, yes. Yeah, a lot of criminals are in the government, like using to mining and...
Yeah, because you had the car
logging, you know, they're doing...
Lavajota.
Illegal logging, yes.
I assume, Max, how's the corruption in Italy?
Corruption has taken a bit of a backseat because we're waiting for the elections on the 26th of September, and it's likely we're going to have a neo-fascist running the country.
Oh, shit.
So there's a lady called Meloni, and she's from the Brothers of Italy party, and they're far right. So it's a bit concerning. She's talking about how we need to stop immigration and Italians need to have more kids, this sort of attitude.
Oh, Mussolini.
Yeah, exactly. Same sort of language. And then she's also talking, they were talking about having a referendum on the EU, on EU membership, but that has sort of gone to the sidelines. Thanks to Brexit. Yeah. Yay, yes. A Brexit benefit. all of the Eurosceptic parties have sort of dropped that one. Also the Euro.
Apart from Orban in Hungary.
Yeah, well, he's the exception, of course. And maybe some Polish parties as well.
But I think in Hungary, it's a little bit different because it's a small country and they need the European Union much more than the European Union needs them. So it's different, Italy and Hungary, and it's a little bit different. Don't you think, Max?
I think a big problem was that the European Union expanded maybe too quickly and brought in a lot of countries that were economically ready, but politically maybe not. And that's why we're seeing a lot of pushback from countries like Hungary and to a lesser extent Poland. But yeah, I think there are real concerns about also bringing in maybe Serbia and some other countries that maybe are not ready, maybe ready economically, but maybe not politically. And I'm a huge supporter of Ukraine joining the European Union. They really want to do it, but I think it's important that they follow as close as possible the rules of entry, because there's a risk of bringing in the country and it being, in a sense, it'd be the opposite. It'd be politically ready, but maybe not economically. And there is massive issues of corruption there as well that need to be resolved.
It seems like everywhere, to be honest.
Yeah,
I've never known a British government to be this corrupt. I can't find record of it. And that's not to say you don't get individuals. I just haven't seen it on a party level within government.
They're so blatant about it, so it's so easy. It's so shameless. It's on such a grand scale that they don't even bother to hide it because they know the media will do that for them.
Oh, God, yeah, Emily Mattis. Did you see this as well, Ricardo?
No, I haven't followed that.
Emily Mattis, a BBC reporter, came out and just leveled the playing field as to what's been going on in the BBC.
It was a pointless speech to make, though.
The now infamous Dominic Cummings Newsnight introduction got way more attention than, in truth, it ever deserved. It was only the next morning that the wheels fell off. A phone call of complaint was made from Downing Street to the BBC News management. This, for context, is not unusual. It wasn't unusual in the Blair days, far from it, in the Brown days, in the Cameron days. What I'm saying is, it is pretty normal for government spin doctors to vocalise their displeasure with journalists. What was not foreseen was the speed with which the BBC sought to pacify the complainant. Within hours, a very public apology was made. The programme was accused of a failure of impartiality. The recording disappeared from the iPlayer, and there were paparazzi outside my front door. Honestly, I think it was a bit long-winded, wordy, sounded a bit peaked, but I don't think, wow, what a shocking breach of impartiality, because we called out the actions of one of the chief architects of the COVID laws. We show our impartiality when we report without fear or favour, when we're not scared to hold power to account, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so, when we understand that if we've covered rule-breaking by a Scottish chief medical officer or an English government scientist, then journalistic rigour should be applied to those who make policy within number 10. Why had the BBC immediately and publicly sought to confirm the government spokesman's opinion without any kind of due process?
Anyone who thinks, who is sort of minded to believe what she was saying will believe it uncritically, and anyone minded to dismiss it will dismiss it uncritically. I actually saw James cleverly. He almost actually said something clever. He described what she said as like a Rorschach thing. He says, whether you believe the BBC has a right-wing bias, she confirmed it. Whether you believe they've got a left-wing bias, she confirmed it. I don't think it's quite that, but I do think it is the point that she won't have changed anyone's mind. She won't have informed anyone. People will just uncritically believe or dismiss what she said. So it was largely pointless, I thought, but, you know, she may have obviously felt it was important to say.
How much do you believe that she believed what she was saying? Because if you look at some of her...
I think absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think she absolutely... I've seen... There's been several people recently leave the BBC. I mean, Andrew Marr is maybe the more extreme because he was properly shilling when he was with the BBC, and now he doesn't. And he's talked a little bit more openly about it as well. And you can sort of see the difference in the way Andrew Marr reports. And when you've got a journalist who reports in two very, very different ways or conducts interviews in very, very different ways, just by working at a different organisation, it's like you don't believe either of them because that one of them must be false, at least one of them. So you can certainly see the corruption of the media just in people's changed ways of doing their job, working in a different place.
No, there's a difference between bias and fake news. No, there's a big discussion now with fake news, but there's a very big difference between lying and having a bias and saying things in a different way.
Yeah, but
you have to be very careful to not to mix this.
As a journalist, you do have to be objective, though. You need to make clear what is an opinion and what is a fact, because it doesn't matter your bias, you should be able to tell.
Now, my understanding of a journalist from when I was a kid is that if someone tells you it's raining and the other person tells you it's sunny, I don't want you to tell me that. I want you to stick your head out of the window as a journalist, find out for yourself and tell me. And that is the lack of value that we are getting from our journalists. And I find the right-wing media is just repeating the propaganda that is given to its select journalists and steering the narrative in a way that has become so divisive and has seen, sadly, it's culminated in, sadly, where we are now.
Even if you think your opinion is correct, you should still know it's an opinion. Brussels sprouts are disgusting, but I understand that's my opinion.
No, there's a big movement now to discredit the media. Oh, everybody lies. In Brazil, this is really strong right now. So all the traditional newspapers, magazines, TV stations. So there's a big movement. And it started on the left when Lula and the PT, the Workers' Party, was in power. They did a big movement to discredit the media. And now the right-wing populism all over the world getting this feeling that the media lies and they are spreading. And it's very dangerous. Because if you don't believe in these traditional newspapers, that you are like equating really different things. Like people say that, oh, the New York Times is the same as Alex Jones, or the Fox News is the same as the Alex Jones of the world. So it's a really dangerous thing, and it's happening. In Brazil, this is really strong. this week in Brazil, they're doing like interviews with the candidates, the presidential candidates, and people, oh no, they are treating the candidates differently. So it's like you're discrediting like The Economist. Now you can hear a lot of people saying that The Economist is lying. It's a traditional magazine that has 200 years. Now they're trying to discredit the magazine.
Financial Times as well, which I always feel safe in looking at. I always feel safe in looking at Bloomberg if you're looking at the stock market, because their entire goal is to get anyone listening to make a decision on where to invest. So it's absolutely crucial they're as accurate as possible with all their information that they're broadcasting. So I've always found Bloomberg, the Financial Times, and The Economist to be like, look, it might not give a political view, but they'll give you enough set of facts that you'll be able to ascertain what's going on within the market at least, and potentially what's happened politically, because they've got to, because otherwise their investors are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Well, that's exactly it. The Financial Times doesn't care about appealing to like most people. They write their articles specifically for the people who own the country, and to make them make sound investments, they need the right information, whether it's what they want to hear or not.
Yeah. Because otherwise they won't buy the paper.
Yeah.
It's very interesting when you're looking at it from that perspective.
The lean left, they say, oh, BBC is too right-wing. And people that are right-wingers, they say, oh, BBC goes too left, trying to...
What it is, it's about trying to make people think that no one tells the truth. So it's like, at the moment, the right wing are taking the piss so much in this country that people are not going to believe them anymore. So what they need to do is to say to people, there is no reliable source of information anywhere. That's what they're trying to say. Everyone's as bad. This is why, you didn't know about the Boris Johnson thing with the Downing Street parties, but they tried to smear Keir Starmer of the Labour Party with the same thing, even though he's now had 2 police investigations into him and they've cleared him both times. They still try and say, oh, yeah, there's no smoke without fire, even though they're the ones who made the smoke. It's all about saying, look, we cannot convince you that the government is trustworthy, so we'll make you think all politicians are as bad. And it's the same thing sort of with the media. What they do is they know that people on the left are going to point to right-wing bias. I was attacking, for example, the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London, who's lost again, but he still thinks he's got important things to say. And he was saying, oh, the Question Time was so biased. You had all these Remainers on it. You never had any Leavers on it. And I challenged him today. I said, look, Nigel Farage was on Question Time lots and lots of times. So were other anti-EU MEPs. I said, name me one pro-EU MEP that ever appeared on Question Time, because I know the answer is 0. And the fact is they've even owned up to this bias. They say even now they make sure their audiences are slightly pro-Brexit or voted for Brexit, because that's what happened in this referendum in 2016. It's like, so how much do you get audiences to reflect how they voted for certain parties after a general election then? Do you make sure they've got a Conservative Party bias when the Conservatives are in power? Did you make sure they had a Labour bias when Labour were in power? I mean, how nonsense to base your audience on the split in a vote that took place 6 years ago, even to this day. So, and that is a bias. And whether you think it's a reasonable bias or not is irrelevant. It is a bias. It's a deliberate bias. It's a prejudice you're imposing on your audience. And bear in mind, a lot of these Question Time studios are in cities which generally voted Remain. So that's tilting it even further away from a representative audience in that city. So what they're doing is, because those of us on the left will point at this bias, what they do is say, actually, no, it's a left-wing bias. They're just whining because it's not lefty enough. And so what they're doing is, for the befuddled observer who doesn't pay attention to politics, they just want some nice, digestible news to let them know what's going on in the world. They're looking at this and going, well, they say it's left-wing bias and they say it's right-wing bias. They're probably just both biased and it's actually fine. So that then the BBC, they're probably thinking, actually, the BBC is probably balanced on par, and the right-wing bias then gets to take hold.
So I've always felt the BBC have always just had to take the contrasting view to whoever they've had on. There's always that famous incident with Ben Shapiro versus Andrew Neil, and Ben Shapiro calls Andrew Neil like a lefty, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas. So I just want to point out that I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Mr. Shapiro, I know that broadcasting in America is now so polarized that on one program you only have the left and another one you just have the right. My job is to question those who have strong views and put an alternative to them. If you were an anti-abortion person, I would be putting pro-abortion questions to you. But you are
really would you call the pro-choice position?
So why don't you just answer my question,
sir? I'm happy to answer your question. Please answer this one. Would you suggest that a late-term abortion is brutal?
I'm not taking a view on this issue. I'm asking you the questions.
Sir, you just suggested that the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible, so I'm asking you, as an objective journalist, would you ask the same question to a pro-choice advocate by calling their position brutal and horrible?
What I'm asking you is that why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected. Now, back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not. It never has been. And you, as a journalist, are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest? Seriously, it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.
Just nuts. And Andrew Neil just took him to task. But the main point being is that they took a contrasting view, and even Ben Shapiro didn't realise that.
Yeah.
And he just assumed it was like a personal opinion, and that's how like news operates in the States.
Yeah.
I think that's why the BBC works so well, Phil. It literally just turns around and says, we're just going to take a contrasting view, and that's why everyone's going around saying, oh, it's left-wing biased and it's right-wing biased. But actually it means it's operating as it should, because it seems to have hacked off both the left and the right.
That's fine where there is a difference of opinion. The problem is they do the same thing when it's objective fact. So if they're reporting on climate change science, for example, it's like, well, let's try and get 2 climate change scientists with opposing views. Oh, there aren't any. So we'll get a climate change scientist and we'll get Mrs. Miggins from down the street who wants a coal fire, and it doesn't work. If you cannot find an expert that has a different viewpoint to the established view, it's because there isn't one. There are certain things as objective facts. There are objective facts in science. There are objective facts in economics, objective facts in medicine, and the BBC can't handle that.
So you're a physicist. Yeah. How do you deal with flat earthers?
I don't have to deal with them because even the BBC doesn't give them a platform. I every now and then, someone will show me something that is amusing, but I don't have to deal with them. The delusional clowns I have to deal with are the ones in government or the ones who are given a platform. So it's Brexiteers I have to deal with. I don't need to deal with flat earthers.
Bill, what are your thoughts on the Brexit bias with other channels? You talked about the BBC. What about within newspapers and...
Well, newspapers, largely there's different types of newspaper in the UK. Most of what we call the mainstream newspapers are owned, and they're owned by very wealthy people who essentially use them to push corporate interests, which are their interests, the interests of the super wealthy. And they've existed like that for quite a while. So you will see, for example, they will have to broach subjects. So if something's happening, they have to be on the likes of particularly the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Daily Telegraph, maybe to a slightly lesser extent. They're targeting largely ordinary working families. So when something is going to outrage them, they have to pretend to be outraged with them. But then what happens is you'll see these headlines and think, oh, even they're attacking Brexit or they're attacking this cost of living crisis, blah, blah, blah. But as you read through the article, what it does is it helps shift blame away from something else and suggest solutions that are no real solution at all. So what they're doing at the moment is, in terms of the energy price problem that we've just had announced again, an 80% increase, they'll know that their readers can't afford this. And they need them to be able to afford it because the first thing to go is the Daily Mail subscription otherwise. And what Labour have proposed is a price freeze. Well, that's the best solution, surely. And they are proposing that it costs about £26 billion, for which we will take it from the unexpected profits, as Keir Starmer's describing it, of the oil and gas companies. So we don't pay a bean for those prices staying the same. There is another plan being pushed by the Tory media on the part of energy companies, which is for energy companies to say, okay, yeah, freeze the prices. That's brilliant. Yeah, great, do that. But rather than take the money out of the profits of oil and gas companies, who are our suppliers, and they won't be very happy about that, we've got a better idea. Instead of charging the oil and gas companies £26 billion, why don't we charge the British taxpayer £60 billion? That's what the figure has been reported, to basically give the energy companies the money. And the reason why there's a difference between £60 billion for this plan and £26 billion for Labour's plan is the money for Labour's plan comes out of profits. The money that will be actually borrowed, so put onto our taxes later, is there to allow them to carry on making those profits. So it's there to make up the difference in the actual increased cost of the gas and oil, as well as to allow both the energy companies and the oil companies to maintain their profit. But the right-wing papers are pushing this idea because from their readers' point of view, it still represents a pay freeze. They'll attack Labour's plan as unworkable. They'll say, well, this is it. They don't talk about the 60. If you want to read about the 60 billion, you have to go to a grown-up newspaper, like, say, the Financial Times, which is where I saw it. They will still talk about this plan. And it may well be what because Liz Truss has got to do something when she becomes Prime Minister. She can't not.
So, I mean, her plan is tax cuts, which then goes against what the Bank of England is trying to do, which is trying to stop people spending.
But she also knows that's not going to work. The tax cuts will save people on low incomes £4 or £5 a month.
But it doesn't do anything for the 4.5 million that...
Yeah, it doesn't help pensioners or people on universal credit, for example.
No, it doesn't do anything for them. There's another tax on universal credit people called the taper rate, which is 55% of every pound you earn. They knock off 55% of a pound from universal credit. That's a tax. No one ever calls it that in the media, but that's what it is. I mean, it's really weird because you've already paid tax for you to be on a universal credit, and then they're going to tax you again. Yeah. Now, I'm going to bring in Ricardo because, Ricardo, we've come up with some suggestions on an economic way forward with this. I'd love to hear your perspective because obviously you've come from outside of the EU, outside the UK, and your economic policies are quite different.
Energy prices are rising all over the world, and people are lost. Everybody's lost because the last 40 years that this is happening, since the end of the 70s, the energy prices are not rising that much. So people are lost, and people are responding to that challenge in different ways. In Brazil, for example, the government also did tax cuts. So the prices, they went down. But as Phil was saying, in the future, they're going to go up again because from where is coming this money? But at the same time, if you subsidize the demand, you are giving money to people that spend a lot of money in energy. So we are also transferring resources from the people that have a lot less money to people who have more. So it's a very hard question. Some liberal economists, they're thinking about let the price rise and the demand will go down. That's maybe another answer to this question. And people will have to get used to higher prices of energy. So there's no easy answer, And also there will be incentives to people to find new energy resources, like solar or wind or another renewable sources of energy. I don't know. It's a very hard question, and it's pretty new. Like the last oil shock was in the 1979, so 43 years ago. Yeah. So how are we gonna do with that? So
what did they do back then when that shock came in? Was it just a case of just get on with it and tough luck and eventually?
Yeah, they dealt with that. That's it. There was inflation, the same thing, and we have to interest rates. In America, Paul Volcker was the chairman of the Fed at the time. The interest rates in America went to 20%. So maybe you're going to see that again. The European Central Bank, it hasn't raised the basic interest rate, but it will come up as in America and everywhere else.
I'd love to hear solutions from everyone, probably at the end, ideas that could resolve this. Max, over to you then. Like, what are your thoughts on?
Well, it was just something that Ricardo brought up about renewables. Is a big problem at the moment is that the price of renewables is linked to the gas price. So even if you use renewable energy, which is much cheaper than gas, people are still paying the same rate. So you could be getting your energy from wind or solar or hydro, but you're still going to be paying the same rate for as if you were buying it from gas-based energy production, which needs to be changed. That needs to be completely reformed. That's why it's, for example, in Scotland, they're producing a huge amount of energy, 97%, I think. And people in Scotland, for example, are still paying massive energy bills, even though most of the energy is produced with wind.
So there's a commonality here, because I know Brazil has a huge amount of hydroelectric power generated, but it also has a lot of potential, untapped potential for hydroelectric. Scotland has that, Norway has it, but there's the problem with the droughts. Now, I don't know how bad it's been in Brazil, but up in Norway, they're actually saying they're considering cutting or reducing the amount of electric they give over to the UK. And I know that other parts of the world are having the same problem. Europe's having the same problem. But the interesting thing that it also affects is nuclear power. If the water's too warm, it doesn't cool down the nuclear reactor. If the water level's too low, it becomes a problem to pump that water into the nuclear power station, although less of a problem than if the water's already warm. So we've got problems with that, and that means that energy prices are going up as a result. So again, it's not an easy solution to any of this. And with the prices going up, it's one of the key things that you always see as a problem. I know in Germany right now, they are selling wood pellets and wood burning stoves, and they're actually instructing the population to pre-prep, not just wood stoves and wood itself, but also 10 days worth of food and water, just in case it goes really bad. And I don't think in Britain, we can't take this seriously because we've got a zombie government. In Brazil, I'm aware that Bolsanaro is pretty much hated by everyone. 30% of the population still seem to support him for some reason. But it is across the world. I'm going to go back over to Phil. Phil, I asked about solutions earlier. Have you got any solutions to solving this problem?
Scientifically, what you have to do is, first of all, have to look at what is the reason for the price rises now. And it is entirely linked to fossil fuels. It's not because solar has suddenly become more expensive or less productive. It's not the same thing with wind or anything like that. It's purely fossil fuels. And so what you need to do is reduce your reliance on them. So then you think, so what do you shift more of? And you may have to have some, you may have to have a power station that is what's called a reliable producer of electricity, which you can ramp it up to its capacity whenever you need to, whether it be a nuclear power station or it could be biofuel, it could be anything, as long as it's like that. But what you were mentioning about hydroelectric and nuclear with the water is also key. And we also know that water, there's a security issue over water supplies for the future. So you don't base it on water either if you can avoid it. So what you need is as much solar and wind as you can reasonably generate.
This video is brought to you by Infinite British Power. Britain has the ability to produce unlimited electricity.
And there's some maintenance potentially required, but then that's it. It doesn't rely on other resources for which there are shortages. Once it's manufactured, once you've got the material, and there are issues maybe with the materials to manufacture it later on if China starts being an arse. Once you've manufactured it, then that's it. And it'll work for 25 years before it needs replacing. So that's the obvious one to me. You can't get all of your energy from it, but we're a very windy island. It's sunny, even though it's not like Dubai. We do still have sun. And it's a madness to me. Like, this roof doesn't have a solar panel on it. Why? I mean, okay, you can blame me. It's not my house. But, the fact that the government, like Angela Rayner was just tweeting, this is related, the same sort of thing has happened with all sorts of things. Labour government were massively increasing our energy security. And then the Tories came into power and removed all these subsidies. And she's just linked something in terms of insulation rates, right? 2010, there was like 1.5 million homes were given some sort of insulation, most of it loft insulation, some cavity wall, some solid wall. Similar value in 2011, more in 2012, but this is all following on from the investment Labour put in. Then 2013, it goes from nearly 2.5 million installations down to less than half. It looks like about 350,000. And it's basically been like that. 2020, it's like less than 100,000 looking at this. I'm looking at a chart. It's plummeted. So, and part of Labour's energy plan, of course, was not just to freeze the energy bills, but to insulate homes so you don't need to use as much energy. And I've been saying recently as well, the government have a golden opportunity here to actually advise people on energy saving measures. I mean, there's limited amounts you could do, but you could still educate. Most people don't understand the scientific principles or the budgeting to work out what they can do. And they can sell it from a cost of living point of view, trying to help people manage the cost of electricity. They don't have to say it's because we're worried about energy supplies. They can just say, we're doing this to help people manage the bills.
But did you hear what Kwasi Kwarteng had to say about that?
I don't know.
He said in The Guardian a couple of days ago, he says, well, we don't want to interfere with people's freedom to use energy as they wish. But as you said, there are policies but there are, like, when it comes to this, I think there are two ways of approaching it. There are policies that cost the government money, so you need to provide funding for installation and stuff. But there are also policies that cost the government absolutely zero. For example, mandating that all buildings must have a minimum standard. Like, for example, here in Italy, all new buildings, I don't remember when it started, but a few years ago, all new buildings have to have solar panels if it's possible. All have to have a certain level of insulation. So you can't literally build something new if it doesn't have solar panels or this level of insulation. And there's a European standard of different classifications for buildings. I think there was something about carrying that over post-Brexit, but maybe the government got rid of that as well. I don't know.
Construction companies are very good Tory donors.
Very good. Grenfell. No.
And also, the problem is, without subsidies, in all honesty, well, actually, it'd be different now. But in the past, as Ricardo said, because I was doing my own maths on this, and he said that energy prices have sort of been stable. Because I was actually doing a bit of maths, and I was working out. So before the last year, have energy prices risen roughly with inflation? So I had a look, and actually they have. Even during the Conservative government, they've risen roughly in line with inflation. It's only been the last year. So now, obviously, energy prices at the moment are 54% higher than they were last year. In October, it's going to be 178% higher. In the new year, it's going to be roughly 290% higher. Then it may come down a little bit. It was keeping roughly in pace with inflation. And now we have monster inflation, and it's massively outstripped that, 20 times higher than inflation. And because this is what's driving a lot of the inflation, the energy costs.
And labour shortages from Brexit.
Well, in terms of what the Bank of England will say, they've cited labour difficulties in terms of business productivity. Yeah.
I'm going to bring Ricardo in then, because I mean, I'd be curious to know what they're doing in Brazil. I know that it's almost a dead government. It's a zombie government as well in many respects. But I also, having lived there, I'm very aware of the housing situation for a lot of people. It's a very sort of like split. You've got people still living in large favelas. I assume that's grown since the COVID pandemic and Bolsonaro's terrible handling. And I'm also, I don't know if you're all aware, I think in Italy this is the same. But in Brazil, they don't have straight gas lines into homes. You have to get a gas container. In fact, they actually have people like Milton that we have in the UK that go around early in the morning handing out gas canisters to supply people's houses. What are they doing over in Brazil for the fuel crisis? And
first thing, I think we have to talk about nuclear power. Like, it's one of the safest and cheapest energy sources. Like we had this problem with Chernobyl and this big tragedy. But since then, we had one tragedy, was Fukushima. So if you compare nuclear energy with a lot of other energies, it's cheaper, it's safer, and it's more environmental friendly. So I think in Europe, maybe in Brazil not, but most parts of the world, you have to talk about nuclear energy. I think I heard about a former Greenpeace president. He said, like, we have to focus. That was his mistake, that he was combating nuclear power, but he said no, it's very good for the environment. So I think Germany was a huge mistake looking back now, to close nuclear plants.
Well, to go for Nordline 2 was a big mistake, I think, is widely accepted now.
My only concern with nuclear would be that who would win the contract? And I'm concerned here in Italy that there are problems. It's a lot better than maybe back in the 1970s and 80s, but there's a risk of maybe, it is a real problem about who constructs these buildings, and is there mafia involvement? And I'm also concerned about, maybe Phil and Alice can disagree with me on this, but in the UK, would you be happy with Serco, running this plant? Or
I have 3 objections to using nuclear for much longer, nuclear fission, that is. The first of which is, as you say now, if we look at Fukushima, it wasn't a bizarre circumstance. They were specifically told when they were building it, this is not going to withstand a level whatever tsunami, which tends to happen in Japan. They were told building this in Japan is a no-go, and yet it still was. And that's that level of corruption there to cut corners will exist. So from a safety point of view, it can be incredibly safe, but it isn't necessarily. Because if you've got a government who will allow constructors to cut corners, my second objection is the fact that it does represent, there is waste, there's nuclear waste, which you have to deal with. And if you stretch too far into the future with it, it does become a problem, and it becomes a costly problem. And whenever you've got a costly problem, at some point, there'll be a government who wants to find ways to cut corners. We've had 12 years in this country of seeing what happens when you get a government in that cuts corners without any heed for the future, because as far as they're concerned, that's another government's problem.
Yeah.
And my third concern is there's still a security issue, because we cannot source the raw materials needed in this country. They come from countries with whom we may not have good relationships in the future. So there's still an issue which could result in higher costs or security of supplies as well. But I would agree, if it was a choice between that and continuing with or even biofuels, like burning anything, yes, for me, I would like them to load a load of research money into nuclear fusion. I think the only reason this is not happening is because oil and gas companies absolutely do not want that. They're not necessarily happy, but they believe that they can compete with nuclear fission. They could not compete with nuclear fusion energy.
I happen to know one of the scientists working at Harwell on the fusion technology. Personally, I've had long discussions with him about this. And he still thinks, Boris came out at the beginning of his premiership and said it'd be done in 15. But that was because he was talking to a private consultation company. He didn't actually talk directly to Harwell. Apparently, it's about 25 years from completion. Now, interestingly, China's also messing around with this. And they announced at the beginning of this year that they just achieved 10 seconds of holding the fusion, the actual heat source. And that seems to be the problem. Not only because the heat is so high, it's being able to contain it. And then you've got to cool down everything to release it, to be able to produce a good enough heat, a right level of heat, to then produce steam, to then hit the turbines and produce electric. But that's 25 years off. And you're right, we should be investing in that. But instead, we've been prattling around with other stuff, such as Brexit. I'll also say this on nuclear energy. I do have to blame the Simpsons a little bit. Mr. Burns didn't do much for nuclear energy and the three-eyed fish. Like, just always imagine yourself having to deal with an evil boss like that and what cutting corners they do, whether it's like robots or dumping the nuclear waste in or hiring Homer Simpson.
But then there's also the problem of where do you put it, because nobody wants a plant like that next door to them. So that's always going to be a problem as well.
No one wants it next to them. But let's go on to Brexit then. There's a segue. So, Ricardo, what's your take on Brexit, its impact on the economy? A lot of people over here are saying it's no longer about the economy. It's about sovereignty. And yet for a huge, all of the campaign, it was not only was this going to be great for sovereignty, this was going to be an economic masterclass. We were going to show the EU how great an economy and a powerhouse Britain was. The EU was going to collapse. The EU was going to separate. The EU economy was going to tank. And yet we're where we are right now. So love to get an outside economic perspective And how is Brexit going?
Not really well to Britain, but if you think like there's a big question, what is the European Union project? What is the objective, final objective? Is to have like a federation or not? So, because if you think in the 40s, after the World War II, Churchill was thinking about that. I don't know if you guys know, he was one of the first proponents of a European Union, of course, not with this name, but with a federation, like let's avoid war. So the European Union started not as an economic project, but as a political project to avoid war. But the economic reasoning was behind, okay, let's build that, because all the northern countries would have like a big demand for their products, and southern Italy, Portugal, Spain, after the 80s, it's like, okay, we can bring capital and we bring also demand for our cheap products, and worked really well. But this economic and political thinking started to clash, because if you think economically, of course, it was really good for most of the countries most of the time. In economics, there's nothing like perfect, so there are also trade-offs all the time, but it worked really well. If you work for the poorer countries, like, it was wonderful. It's like really, really good. But there was this problem. People started to feel like not represented. Like, that's why, and the right-wing populism in the countries started to use the political narrative. Oh, we are losing sovereignty. We don't want to be Europeans. We are Poles. We are Hungarians. We are British. We are not Europeans. And this is a disaster. Like we should getting people more and more connected, and more commerce, and more. But European Union also had its faults as well. It started to get too much regulations, too much regulations, and people got resented because of that. But for sure, Britain had lost a lot leaving the European Union, for sure. That's my take. But I think maybe in 10 years, maybe you guys will be back. What do you guys think?
Oh, wow. So did you see it as a possibility that it could work at any point? Was there anything they could do to make it work? Or is it just that we're geographically and historically linked, so entwined to Europe, that it's an impossibility to be outside the bloc?
Oh, you guys know that much better than I do. But there's this conflict. The British, they are Europeans or not? They are like the part of Europe or not? Because you guys are on an island. I think there's like, I don't know, you guys, you know better than I do. So please, this tension between being Europeans and non-being Europeans, you guys feel you are outside and you belong to Europe at the same time. I think it was it was a big discussion when the UK got into the European Union, was really latent, this discussion. I think it will be unresolved for much longer. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I like something you brought up there which was very interesting, is this idea that people didn't feel European and the British, for example, but also in other parts of Europe as well. What politicians did was, when there was a problem, they'd say, oh, well, this is because of the European Union. So the European Union was a very easy scapegoat. You could blame all of your problems. And Nigel Farage in Britain was very good at this, and I think this is one of the reasons so many people were convinced by him. He said, look, you can't get a doctor's appointment because we're in the European Union. If we leave, then we'll be able to control all of this. We'll be able to control immigration. We're going to be able to reduce the burden on schools, on the NHS, on public services. And you used to hear the same rhetoric here in Italy, in other parts of Europe as well, especially on the right, and to a certain extent on the left, but more on the right. The idea that, these people are coming, they're taking our jobs, and if we are able to take back control, we'll be able to control our borders. And here in Italy as well, blaming the European Union for failures of government. And something, maybe Ricardo, maybe later on if you want to mention it. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but the situation in Greece, this was used a lot as well by both the left and the right in Europe to say, yeah, look at what's happening to Greece, when in reality, I think a lot of the problems Greece had were internal problems, and it was very easy just to point the finger at the EU. But what's happened since then, since Brexit, in a sense, is when the UK left, it exposed what it's actually like to be outside the bloc and the problems that are associated with that. And that's why we've seen a massive drop in support for leaving the European Union, and right-wing parties, very far right. There are the extremes, of course, who will always want out, but the sort of mainstream right-wing parties have pulled back on their rhetoric about leaving, or even leaving the euro, because they understand.
Only in Europe.
Yes.
In the UK, they've carried on blaming the EU for everything, even though we're now outside of it, which is just nuts. Sorry, Max, didn't mean to interrupt.
No. That's all I had to say. Yeah, maybe we can hear from Phil as well.
I mean, the issue is, like Ricardo said, it was actually originally a peace project, but the way, and the people seem to forget this, the way the peace project worked is it made all the major powers of Europe economically dependent on each other. So if you knackered that trade, as you tend to do with a war, then you would suffer economically. Because what happened is, yeah, Churchill didn't want us to be part of it, but that's because, again, and I always think it's because ultimately Britain, almost uniquely in Europe, hasn't in living memory had foreign soldiers on their streets, So we don't have that fear. So it's quite easy for us to take things for granted. And we also were seen, because in post-Empire days, we were leaders of the world, and Churchill still wanted that. So he wanted Europe to band together and to be one bulwark against like the others. And he was going to lead the Commonwealth as another bulwark. And then there was going to be America as the third one. And it didn't work out because, the European project went so well. Everyone got so wealthy. We used to take the piss out of Italy, and they were catching up. And Britain was the sick man of Europe. And then they thought, we need to join. And then it was the French going, no. Because they understood all we were interested in was the economic benefits, not the political peace project, just the economic benefits. So then, as Ricardo said, you got into this situation where everyone was happy. It was the Conservatives that took us in because they loved the economic benefits. Then the regulations started coming, which I don't think are too onerous. I've not seen anyone point me to one that is bad, and I don't see how you can ever get a bad one, because it has to be agreed by so many people in so many different countries. How can anything ever get agreed if it's not going to be in the common interest? But they didn't like the political project, even though, again, Margaret Thatcher came up with it, so particularly when it was going to threaten their ability to hide their money so they don't have to pay taxes. So, but again, what has happened is disentangled ourselves from that trade that made it such a successful project. We've done the equivalent of going to war without actually going to war, and we're suffering economically. And it's like, yeah, that's how the European project worked in the first place. For the longest time in European history, the major powers of Europe haven't actually been at war. Wherever there's been a war in Europe, it's not been in the EU or its precursor. It worked, and it worked because everyone saw that they were economically dependent. That's the whole basis of the project. And like in this country, we convinced people that it was all nonsense. And now we've seen it's not nonsense. If you remove yourselves from this large single market, you are going to suffer economically, and we have done. And at the moment, they're hiding it all behind COVID. They're now trying to blame the lockdowns. It's the lockdowns' fault. You can't say that you're in favour of the lockdowns and now complain that your bills are too expensive. So they're blaming COVID in some way or other. They're blaming the war in Ukraine in some way or other. At some point in the future, there's going to be a relative period of global calm for 10 years, and they won't be able to hide anymore. I just can't wait that long.
You want it now?
I want people to wake up now. That would be lovely. Because the harm is going to carry on, and it's going to become more permanent.
Can I just say something about the European regulations? Is something that I've always found is that their focus is towards protecting consumers. So whether it's rail prices or energy prices or or free movement or things like that. It seems to be geared towards protecting the consumer. And maybe this is something that the right and maybe even the left have been critical of. Like, for example, maybe Phil, I just want to bring in Phil just for a second on this. Like, I don't know if you saw the interview with Mick Lynch, who's
in bits.
Yeah, so he was of the belief that the problem with Europe was that it was trampling on workers' rights. And my approach is that it's not so much trampling on workers' rights, it's about protecting consumers. And in some cases...
I thought it was trade union rights that it was trampling. I thought he was specifically aiming at trade union rights. Is that... Or is it workers' rights and trade unions? Have I missed that?
Well, sometimes you'd like to think they were the same thing, but it isn't always, is it?
No. No. From a historical perspective, history cap on, you could look at Germany and its unification. It just knocked out tariffs internally, unified a set of nations who weren't particularly keen on the project. A lot of them did like the identity. There's still elements of that today. You can see that in Munich. But in general, it was a unification project, getting rid of barriers, unifying the country, a basic level of standardization, minimum level tariffs on goods coming into the country, and then a development of industry and rail. That's how Bismarck got the German state up and running and made it, at that stage, probably the biggest powerhouse within Europe. And it's interesting to see that you could almost use that as an example of why it was a success, why that's a success, and why the EU will be a success. The standardization I find really interesting, because on the one hand, you could argue it dampens creativity. On the other hand, you could say, well, standardization means everything cheaper. So, for example, they've just done that with the wires. They've said, look, we're just going to have one set of wires. And you can look at it on both sides. It's standardization. It cheapens the cost across the country. But does it stifle creativity? Because you've only got one set, you can't really branch out and try other things and see if it's better than the previous product. And I find both very interesting arguments. And I've heard Farage say that. He's like, and Richard Tice, they're both quite up for competition on that level to allow creativity to build a better product. I would also argue with them, and Richard Tice brought this up, he was quite happy that we got the vaccine before the EU. Like, we somehow managed to circumvent the EU, even though they put an application the day before. But he said it was really good that we beat the EU at getting the vaccine. We got it ahead of them. And it's competition. And it seems to be that these idiots, Farage and Tice, haven't realized that competition, trade competition, resource competition, one of the key ingredients for World War I and World War II. And they want it back. And they want everyone to be a separate nation state. They don't want union. And they also seem to on the other occasion, they'll come and say, oh, we want an economic union. We don't want political. It's like, well, that doesn't work. You have to have standardization of products to make this successful at some basic level. I could also, and I'm going to bring on a final point, the environmental standards. We had environmental standards because we're in the EU. Now, I wouldn't swim in any river, lake, or sea at the moment. And the biggest irony being we've just had 40-degree temperatures. And the one thing you'd like to do is be able to get into some water and cool down. And we can't do that because they've poisoned it. E. coli, the other diseases that they're finding at sea at the moment is freaking horrendous. And I think yesterday, the three French MEPs have gone to the European government and said, we want to take them to court. Because it's almost like this unrealization in the British political system. Our actions affect not just us, they affect others. And there's this self-centered attitude of, no, it's all about us.
I just want to go to Ricardo for a moment. I just wanted to ask him a question. Redirected in his direction. What are relations like between Brazil and its neighbors? Is there continuous support for more trade, better political connections, or is it pretty much like the Brexiteers in Britain, where we're at war with everyone?
Really good question, Max. I'm going to try to tie two things together. There's a strong movement these days against globalization, against liberal values in the old sense, the classical sense, more trade, more openness, more immigration, more integration. There's a big movement. We have to understand that. And this goes from the left to the right, from the extreme left to the extreme right, and they are against that things. And that's really strong in Brazil as well, as in Europe and Britain. I don't know. It's a thing that we have let's have less commerce, and less immigration, have less integration. And in Brazil, it's really strong. Brazil was building this integration with Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay. It's called Mercosur. It's these 4 countries, and we were like having agreements with the European Union, but now it's going it's going nowhere because there are a lot of people against that. So what we need like now, it's more people with a better discourse about this liberal and internationalist values. You know, it's not only about tackling. I'm an economics professor, but I try to avoid to speak too technically because it doesn't win hearts. You know, you have to speak better about like liberal values, all liberal values. About the European Union, it's a liberal project, not liberal in a old sense. This is good. It's good to exchange cultures. It's good to immigrants bring cheap labor. It's an economic argument, but they also bring culture. They bring human capital. So it's gonna get better. Yeah, of course, we have had rules and they have to follow the rules. But if they bring and follow our rules, our laws, it's really good that they come here and they bring. Even in America, that was really open. This narrative is winning traction. So in Brazil, it's winning a lot of traction. You know, Bolsonaro, he's like Orban or Trump or all this Nigel Farage and Boris. I would disagree with you guys, but yeah, I saw you guys hate the guy. I realized that. But I think Boris is a little bit different. And even the way he treated the COVID pandemic, it's different. It's a different level. But okay, that's a big discussion. But what I'm saying, like, we need someone that even the Labour Party during I was falling from here, the discussions, the Labour Party couldn't defend the European Union. The left, I'm not a leftist, but the left always was an internationalist. So come on, I think couldn't defend the European Union.
I think Phil has a good take on that, on why the Labour Party were a bit cautious about, talking about rejoining or defending the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, the issue for Labour is that, so we have first past the post here, almost uniquely in Europe.
With the exception of Belarus.
And so it's not the majority who decide who forms the government. It's not even a sizable minority. It's roughly 1 to 2% of the people who vote, which is much less than 1 to 2% of the population. And so you can look at what you think is the general mood of the public, and it's totally irrelevant for getting yourself elected. And so you have to look at the general mood of that 1 to 2%. And the only people ever polling these people are political parties. And what Labour are finding is that they're absolutely sick of Brexit. They're sick of the divisions it's caused. They're sick of some people, it's like for the first time since the English Civil War, hundreds of years ago, it's torn families apart, it's broken relationships, and they just wanted it to stop. The reason why Make Brexit worked as a campaign slogan in 2019, it wasn't just rallying the Brexiteers around them, it was rallying those who just wanted the pain to stop. They've been under 6 or 5 years of torture, I suppose, at the time. Actually can't do maths, it's like 3.5. And they just wanted it to end. And it was like, look, okay, Boris Johnson was promising that it's all over. As soon as we leave, it's all over. We've got the deal. It's all in the oven-ready deal. It's all, we can then focus on the things you want us to focus on. The reason we can't do that at the moment is because of Brexit, but people voted for it. We have to go through with it. So people went, okay, here you go. But that is still, even though that's gone sour, people are still of that view until it changes, until people realize that actually the pain of Brexit is worse than the pain of having it rise up the political agenda again. Labour have to be a little bit cautious on it. But at the same time, if I always say judge by actions, not words. Labour's rhetoric on the EU is not at all aligned with my own, but their policies, their practical policies are, we want a veterinary agreement with the EU. We want a security agreement with the EU. It's all about, recognition of qualifications, mutual recognition of qualifications. It's all about reversing the damage of Brexit. It's not as quick a process as some would like, but we can't have that quick process. It's not actually possible. We can't rejoin the single market. It's not Labour stopping it. We can't do it because the EU will tell us, if Labour were to come to power and say, we want to rejoin the single market, please, the EU would say no. And the reason they'll say no is because it was massively disruptive to us for you to leave it. If you rejoin and then leave it again, it'll be massively disruptive. And if the Conservatives come straight back into power in a few years' time, that's what they will do. So until the Conservatives, the maddest part of this, until the Conservative Party say that they're willing to say that Brexit was a bad idea and we should reverse it, we can't actually reverse it because the EU will not allow us to, because they need it to be politically settled in this country. They've said as much. This is not my speculation. And they will do, because people will lose hope. They'll look at the Conservatives now, they're so diehard Brexit. The current crop are. But as soon as it's an electorally... So what has to happen is the British public have to be so much against Brexit. Then those 1 or 2% have to be massively against Brexit. Then the Conservatives cannot win elections whilst they're so pro-Brexit. So then they will change. Because we have to remember, the majority of the Conservative Party were never in favour of Brexit. It was a small cabal within them. The party membership may be, but not the parliamentary party. They were never in favour of Brexit. It was this small little group of entryists that 30 years ago would have been members of the BNP. So we're in this mad situation now. Labour have to, I'm actually really pleased that they are taking a pragmatic view about it, because it's how you win power. And how you win power isn't appealing to the majority, nor, unfortunately, is it saying you will do the right things in government. They have to do the right things in government, but they also have to understand that the people who are going to decide who the government is are not the most politically astute.
Do you think proportional representation will be on the agenda?
So. I hope so. Because it's the only thing that can we are just going to be in this hideous cycle of Labour being in power, fix some of the leaky roof, Conservatives come back in and strip the lead out of the roof again. And we're just going to have this cycle until, because proportional representation, and I mean real proportional representation, I'm not interested in single transferable vote, although it would be better. Proportional representation would mean that there's no way the Conservatives can get sole power again, because that's the issue. They can form a coalition, but they couldn't form a coalition with their extreme right wing calling the shots. That won't happen. So they'll have to moderate.
I've often wondered about the House of Lords and turning that into the proportional representation, having two chambers, allowing you to have a constitution, actually a codified constitution, which is something that I think we're in desperate need. I noticed in Brazil, you guys have a great track record of taking presidents to jail, which is fantastic stuff to see. And I also noted that Bolsonaro was taken to court because he said that he wouldn't rape a woman, a congresswoman. I mean, absolutely horrific thing to say. And he said it on camera. I mean, he said it's a nasty thing.
He said,
yes,
you are too ugly, I wouldn't rape you. Yes.
So he was taken to court over that. And
he was only fined
£10,000, which was, to me, I thought was pathetic. I mean, it should have been.
But it won't happen anything with him. Maybe if he's ousted, maybe he's out of the presidency, maybe, but not right now, no.
When is the next elections?
Now, in 35 days.
Okay.
And if you're talking about as the Brexit has divided families, it's happening the same thing here in Brazil. Families are getting really divided. I am calling a fascist and a communist in the same day. All the Lula supporters call me a fascist, and the Bolsonaro supporters call me a communist. In the same day, maybe twice a day, each adjective. But pretty much in the center, so I'm calling a fascist and a communist. But it's tearing families apart here. The same thing here. Even it's really, really bad. And this is the problem. We were talking about the media. It's like you don't live in the same world. Like the news, the opinions, the facts are different. That's really, really bad. Like people say, no, come on, you're not saying that. Come on, this is not true. And people are living in bubbles now. We are hearing a lot about that. But I think Brexit and the Trump election and Bolsanaro, it's a reflex of that. People are living in a different worlds. And I know how much that is social media or how much that it's a strategy. We have to think about that. There are a lot of political consultants that work on that. They try to divide people, or Russians, spies, I don't know, or it's a combination of all that, or unemployment, or rising prices. So you combine that it's a really bad situation, and it's really scary for me, at least. That I'm coming back to the place, to the topic I was talking before. We need somebody to defend like free speech, reason, logic, and integration, commerce, stability. We don't have this. Who is defending that? Maybe Steven Pinker, but he's intellectual. I'm saying a politician or a leader that's defending this kind of classic liberal values against the authoritarian left and authoritarian right. I don't see all over the world. I don't see people defending that.
And I just want to ask both of our guests a question. Would you consider running for Parliament? Phil, do you want to go first?
No, in reality, first of all, I don't like travel. I'm not a huge fan of London, even though I shall be going there. Although I have now been thinking about trying to book myself onto one of the coaches from like Leeds or York or something.
You could get the Parliament moved up north.
Yeah, see, this is the problem. This is the problem. So I'd have to. First of all, I live in Toryland, so I will never be elected to Parliament here. This is not actually happening. But if I did, let's just say, then I'd have to like somehow persuade a load of people that I should leave the party, which would be very difficult because I'm not. I often defend like pragmatic politics, and I'll defend diplomatic behaviour. I am not very diplomatic. At all. So it works for being a gobshite on the internet, not at all for being a parliamentarian. And although people will go, oh, you'd be really good at the dispatch box, maybe, I wouldn't necessarily be very good at, I referred like in a video today about the old lady who accosted Gordon Brown some years ago, and he called her a bigger, but what he thought was away from her, but the microphones were still there. I'd have said it to her face. So that's not going to work. So I would never actually be in a position where I could persuade people to give me power.
You'd be more like John You'd be more like John Prescott, maybe.
Even he had some refinement to him, and he just punched the occasional. Someone who actually assaulted him first, to be honest, who assaults a boxer. But yeah, so it would never happen. There's no purpose in me trying to join. I can't join Parliament where I am. There's no purpose in trying, because what would I hope to achieve? It's one of those things, really. I'm much better off just shouting at the people who do. That's why I sometimes go easy a little bit on MPs for some things. Sometimes people are surprised I'm going easy on some MP. I know some of them are just on it for the gravy train, but there are others who are not. And it is very disruptive to their lives. It's just disruptive to their personal lives, their family lives. Forget about hobbies, really, unless your hobby is making lots of money on the side. That's it. It's incredibly disruptive. And it's like, so what good do I think I could do? I could be like Chris Bright. That'd be the zenith of my political aims. I could cause trouble on the backbenchers, preferably for the opposition to me, not my own party. I would at least behave myself, but
Ricardo?
Yeah.
No, I'm not running. I was affiliated with a party, but no, I gave up. I think, like Phil, I like to say what I think, and to be honest, and maybe one day, I don't know, but not really. I don't think I could get elected. No, I have too many opinions. So no, I think you have to be more careful what you say when you want to be a politician.
Maybe the European Parliament, because I'm a bit like Phil. I'm in Tory land, but it's not really Tory land where I am. It's a bit more Lega land or League land, which is very far right. So there'd be no chance of getting elected around here. But maybe there's a chance at the European Parliament. That'd be something I'd like to do. But I'm not an Italian citizen, so I can't do that. Maybe if I returned home to Ireland, there might be a better chance. And Alex, what about yourself?
I'd have to be hit round the head with a brick. I'd run for London mayor. I'd do that. I think there's a lot of scope you can do there. You don't have as much difficulties. You still got a decent check in your power with the assembly, so you couldn't go too off the rails with it in terms of power. But you could do a lot of good for a lot of people, and I could do that for 2-3 terms. And I think I would do that if there was the right opportunity and everything else. I'd give it a run for that. But MP, don't know. Prime Minister, don't know. I'm too controversial and direct like the rest of you. I've got foot and mouth disease. On that cheerful note, that was a much better ending for a cheerful night. I'm going to say goodbye. And you're a fan of Nick Clegg, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I like Nick Clegg. I'm maybe the only one, no?
You may be the only one. Mind you, he must, the only thing I'll say in his favour is he must have David Cameron absolutely seething, because after they've left office, Nick Clegg has certainly done the better of the two.
Yeah, Vice President of Facebook. How the hell did you do that?
Meta, is it? Meta now, isn't it?
Welcome everybody back to another Sunday Roast. We are with a plethora of excellent guests. Plethora the right word? We've got a lot of excellent guests. Today we've even got courtesy from Brazil, Ricardo Hammoud, who is a professor of economics and philosophy. And we have Phil Morehouse, who is a massive YouTuber, and Max Robespierre. And I've just introduced everyone, and it's actually not up to me. I shouldn't have done that. You're all meant to introduce yourselves. I'm so